Hello, everybody. Welcome back to day 2 of Point of View, our online conversational series with Cinder Bay School of Design in collaboration with Association of Designers of India. Please join me over the next 28 days by my counting, 15 episodes of exciting conversations with 15 prolific creatives from the domain of design education, communication design, textile design, architecture, and interior design as we take a peek into some of these wondrous minds and creative thinkers. My name is Srishti Bajaj, and I will be your host. I've been the curator of the series, and it is an absolute pleasure to have all these speakers who've agreed to be part of our little series. So a big thank you to all of them. Hi, Mookesh. Thank you for giving us your peek. You're welcome to stay back. I have a few more things to say. As we know, 2021 has been, by no mean measure, quite an adventurous year for all of us. But interestingly, for Cinder Bay School of Design, it's their 15th year since its inception. And what a wondrous journey under the able leadership of Professor Basan Nair. He's here in the audience. If you want to give him an applause, please do in the chat box. I'm sure he'll appreciate it. So Cinder Bay started in Calicut in 2006, and has become a well-recognized institution for design education in both UG and PG, interior design, fashion, visual communication. They are spread across 14 branches, by the way, with 13,000 strong alumni. So an amazing, amazing feat, Basant, and it's really remarkable. I also want to give a quick shout out to Sophia, Viraj, and Swapna, who've been helping in the back end, helping us put all of this together. Thank you very much. We still have a month to go, so yeah, stick around. We also have our lovely audience joining us today. So while me and the speakers do the talking here, you guys sit back, get yourself a cold or a hot brew, whichever you prefer. And yeah, let's begin. And of course, Mookesh is here. Good morning, Mookesh.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for having me.
Mookesh is joining us from Arizona. So it's early morning for him. It's about 8:30, I believe, your time, or about 8:40. So it's early morning. Before I give a quick introduction to Mookesh, I would like to bring out a first poll, because it'll kind of set the context for what we're going to talk about today. Swapna, can we have the first poll, please? This will also give you an indication of where Mookesh's loyalties lie in terms of the design discipline. So what elements stand out for you when you look at a signage in Indian streets? I mean, I'm sure all of you see it around yourself all the time. So what do you appreciate? Do you appreciate the hand-painted lettering, the multilingual typefaces, or the wonderful bold colors? We'll give you a minute to chew on that. And in the meantime, Professor Mookesh, he is Professor Emeritus at Arizona State University, Tempe, USA. He's also the former dean at ISD, Bombay, and principal at Chanchal, a design consultancy firm. He's received his MFA in graphic design from RISD, which is Rhode Island School of Design. He also has a diploma in visual communication from National Institute of Design. There are a bunch of NID designers in the audience, Mookesh, if you'd like to have a look. I noticed them before. He also has a BS from Ahmedabad Science College, Gujarat University, India. You're also the principal director at Chanchal, Scottsdale, and practice information and experience design. And the list of clients include Arizona State Land Development, Phoenix Art Museum, Metropolitan Boston Transit Authority for Malcolm Greer Designs, and Government of India for a major traveling exhibition, My Land, My People. And I know that we're going to deep dive into that a little bit. And you're also the recipient of the Fulbright Research Scholar Grant, a United Nations Development Grant, and many, many, many other awards. And guys, let me tell you, when I was thinking of inviting Professor Patel, I was looking at the CV and I really didn't know what I should talk about, because amazing list of achievements and work. It's been an amazing, prolific career. So I had a tough time picking what I should bring to the conversation and what I should leave out. So that's just to let you know. You also focus on design education, online learning. We were talking about the 4-year fully online communication design program that you've just created, which is amazing. Information design, semiotics, visual interpretation, data visualization, exhibition and experience design, and typography. Which brings me back to the poll. Let's see what do you understand by typography, guys? Can we have the answer, Swapna? Let's see what the poll says. Oh, the colors. It's actually quite equitable. Hand painted lettering 26%, multilingual typefaces 23, but the wonderful bold color seems to be what stands out. Are you surprised by this, or you expected this answer?
No, I'm actually not surprised, because I think color culturally is our forte, and I don't think we'll be able to live without color in anything and everything we do on a daily basis. Food, design, of course, and we love flowers with all different colors. So I'm not surprised, but I think quite a few students also responded to other two options, which is hand painted lettering, which is my favorite. I love, of course, that includes the color, but I love the hand painted typography. And funny things that happen when some people try to use another language, they're not too familiar, and they mix up little letters here and there, or have, little inappropriate spacing and the funny things that come out. So those are my favorite things.
The leading and the kerning for a type design is it's the god of the details, right?
Absolutely.
No, I think Indian type fonts have kind of had a little bit of a resurgence, because you see a lot of young Indian designers now actually using and creating a lot of interesting fonts. There's also the Indian Type Foundry, which has been doing amazing work over the years. Google has an entire list of Indian types. Not a lot of them are street type fonts, which I'd like to call them, but still, I think it's coming back, which is a great sign, actually, of appreciation of vernacular right here in India.
That's right. I hope they go that route, because in the Western world, at least in America, I've noticed that a lot of type font designers are now involved in looking at the 18th, 19th century hand painted, handcrafted, hand etched type fonts, and then convert that into, etched fonts into type fonts.
Right.
Block type into fonts. So I hope that the Indian designers also go that route.
So this kind of leads me to I guess my first question to you in some sense. Did you always know that you wanted to be a communication and a graphic designer? Even if you may not have sort of known that's a discipline, but did you always have a sense of that, okay, this is what interests me or piques my,
Internally, yes. In my mind, I always wanted to be, working with my hands. But that involves a lot of things. Even doctors work with their hands, right? But my material was different. My material was not parts of the human body, but it was paper, it was earth, it was paint, it was anything that I could feel and touch with texture in it, and not the color of the blood. That's all I had in mind. But no, I didn't really had a clear thing in my mind, because that's what the journey is all about, right? We all have a unique journey. We all start with influences from family, influences with dear and near ones in our lives. And then we go to school, and the teachers influence us, and so on and so forth. So it's a very unique journey that all of us have. So no, I didn't really know what I wanted to be. Maybe until my first year the last year in school, in the final year, when we were all pressured to think about what we like to do internally in our minds. What would I like to do? But then Indian culture is such that it's all dominated by our family members. No, you have to be this. So that was also the case in my life. They all wanted me to be a doctor.
Uh, let's have your slides in the meantime, because there's some
Sure,
very interesting photos with.
let's. So I'll go through my journey very quickly, and then stop me wherever you want. And let's see.
And I just want to tell everybody that, guys, you're in for a treat, because some of the visuals that Mookesh has in his slides are amazing and extremely nostalgic for many of you who are sitting here. So let's see.
Okay.
So as every conversation, we are beginning from a little bit of the past. And I think for point of view, I was always very, very interested to know the history of the speakers, what makes them tick. So I think it's always best to start from the beginning. We can't see your screen yet, so.
I am just trying to figure out the full screen, which I had it a minute ago.
You can try view in PDF and go full screen. I think there's a.
Right. There we go. Can you see it?
Not yet. I believe you might have to share your screen again.
Okay.
I think things like full screen should be on voice command. Acrobat, go full screen. Minimize. I think those will be convenient additions to Adobe. There we go. Full screen, please. Okay.
Bear with me. Just a
All
second.
right. Command L, I think, for Acrobat.
Are we there?
Somewhere, somewhat, but not quite.
Okay.
Command, stop sharing again. Would you like me to share from here, and then you can just prompt me? Would that work?
Let's try once
Oh,
more.
perfect. It's here, full
Okay.
screen.
There we go.
You're set.
Sorry about that. So
Okay.
coming back to our conversation, because we have limited time, my life has been a long journey, and like quite a few of my colleagues, we are on the last phase of our careers. So most of my presentation is focused on my past. So I'll quickly go through that. So I was born in Nairobi, Kenya in 1952. And I was raised by my maternal family. And this is my grandfather. I have learned a lot from him. 3 or 4 things that I quickly share with you is he taught me, first thing he taught me that if you earn 100 rupees, keep away 25 rupees somewhere and forget about it, and make the ends meet within the remaining 75. Number one. Number two, if you give somebody something, never expect it back. If you do, if it does return back to you, then give it to somebody else, and then the ball keeps rolling. And if you do borrow some money, the first thing you do is to return it. And the last thing he said is, do what your heart says. He was the only in the family who told me to do that. So when I was about 9 years old, we moved to India in 1962 to a place called Nar town. Now you see the hand painted, and it still exists. After all many years, this is exactly the hand painted railway station sign. And so I was always fascinated with that. But this is Nar. And then in 1963, we moved to Ahmedabad, mainly because I was getting a bit naughty in the rural area. And I was climbing trees, which my grandparents were nervous about and jumping into ponds full of crocodile. So they said, no, 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 let's move to, to a better place for my behavior as well as my upbringing and schooling. So we moved to Ahmedabad in 1963, and then cleared the SSCE, which might be a very strange term for young students today, but it was called the school. What was it? I forget now.
Senior secondary.
Secondary, yes. So that was it. And I passed that. I wasn't a very bright student. So if you see, I was in the second class here. But as we were talking about earlier, they always wanted me to be a doctor, not an architect, because by that time I thought, I would like to be an architect, because I used to make a lot of buildings from matchsticks when I was in school. And I loved that idea of space and things happening within the space and outside the space. Dr. Anuradha talked about, the skin of the building. And to me, that was also very exciting to work with. But I had to go into the medical pre-science program where you qualify for the full-fledged medical programs. So I went through classes where I would memorize the diagrams, but never dissect any of the specimens that I was supposed to dissect, beginning from earthworm and going to cockroach, and then to the frogs, and then to the rats, and so on and so forth. I never did that in my first year at all. Because there were many students in the first year, I was sort of always picking a place where the instructors would, by the time they would collect the drawings from every table, come down to see the specimen that one's supposed to dissect, they would miss it. And I got away that. And then finally, I passed the first year examination. Again, if you see that, right? It's second class, too low to get into medicine. So this news was broken to my mama, who is my maternal uncle. And he had this big dreams of me being a doctor and all that. And I announced it on a family dinner table that I was second and was not able to go to medical school. So in a way, it was a failure for him. And so he didn't speak to me for another 5 to 6 years. But he said, do whatever you want. And then he walked out of the dinner table without finishing his meal. I took the next train from Calcutta, where we were spending the time as a family, to Ahmedabad, because I thought, oh my God, this is a great chance for me to get into SET. I reached and I was late for enrollment. Figure that, right? See how things work out. You dream about something and you land up somewhere else. But the very next day, I read a newspaper ad from NID, which nobody had heard about. I didn't, and I didn't even know what it was, but they were accepting students who had just passed SSCE and could be enrolled in this program. And I read a little bit, and it was similar to architecture. They had films, they had this, they had photography. And I said, okay, I'll get into this for a year, do as best as I can. I didn't have a portfolio, so maybe this gives me a chance to build my portfolio to apply to SET. So there I was. I entered the building for our 6-day interview. These days, our interviews are shorter, but we had a 6-day interview from morning till evening. And we were asked to do all kinds of things. But the environment itself just mesmerized me. And I said, okay, this is it. Forget about architecture. And there we go.
I would say, sorry to interrupt, but I would say you actually ended up where you were meant to be, because even with medicine, if you were sort of happy making sort of very accurate diagrams, by the way, from the looks of it, I think this is your genesis of information design right there.
You are absolutely right. That's where I didn't know what I was doing, right? But that was it. So my youngest uncle, my mama, who graduated in the first batch from Pune Film Institute, he was a gold medalist. I have never won any gold in my life, but he was a gold medalist, and he influenced a lot. His handwriting, I copied, and now there were times when we used to cheat our family members. I would write a note on his behalf because my handwriting was similar to his, and he would get away with murder. Uh, um, and yes, you're right. I learned a lot about what clear communication with diagrams could be, or even numbers and letters could be. So large numbers of data, how do you make it clear and accessible to the reader was the thing. But coming back to NID, it was a unique experiential learning space, right? Nothing that I had ever seen, or even my colleagues had seen. It was a space where we could, voice our own, thoughts clearly. And as you see, immediately I could relate things because information design was all there. Charles Eames had designed this Nehru exhibition, and it had to be replicated. By the way, the Nehru exhibition was replicated at least, as far as I know, 3 to 4 times. And when we were in the first year, this work was going on for the second installation of the Nehru exhibition in Delhi. And so we were made to, help or work with our instructors to design, redesign or remake or reproduce this. So all these, back then there were no computers. So these were all photographs, hand printed in the photo lab. All the text was hand printed on the letterpress machine, cut and pasted exactly as Eames had planned it. And so massive exhibit with lots of products as information means. And so it was a fascinating experience for me. Vikas Satwalekar was working on this project then. So it was a fantastic experience. But the whole conviction of design, which Charles Eames had presented in this diagram, which is, that you work with enthusiasm and conviction between studio, client, and society. And that hasn't changed. So there are overlaps, and you figure out what is your area of operations when you consider studio, client, and society. To me, the society was the most important one, and I think that was also for him. But the balance between what your convictions as a studio person or a member of the studio and your client, or now we call them user groups or stakeholders, and the society at large. And the happy place that you find in the center is where you start working. So this to me was fantastic. And his example, his India report is based on one single object, which is the lota. Now the lota has taken thousands of years and thousands of people to design it. But that was his whole concept, that the reason why the Design Institute needs to be established is to train students to compress this thousands of years and thousands of people to fewer people in lesser time. But the idea was the same, that it had to have a purpose, right? And it needs to work with people with economic conditions, climate conditions, and serving the purpose of keeping the water cool and transport it. Because the women used to transport pots and pots with 7 or 8 pots on their head from the well to the house, and it had to balance perfectly with 2 pots on the waist of the women. And so if you see the form, it works very well economically, doesn't hurt. It might be that the woman has a child, in one hand, and another hand a pot. And I think still we can see that scene or scenarios in rural India. And so, that was his concept of design. And that sort of touched me. I think mentors are important. And my entire life. I've had mentors everywhere I go. Most of them are my teachers, but there are friends. I mean, because of limited space, this could have been, you know, hundreds, but then you wouldn't be able to see the faces. So I have here at least 8 of my mentors. Vikas, of course, taught me almost everything I know in terms of exhibition design, information design, color, most importantly, how to use color. He has been my friend and mentor and colleague for forever, and unfortunate that he passed in this current times and left us. IS Mathur taught me all about films. Pradeep Choksi taught me about drawings, illustrations. Manu Gajar, of course, in typography. Mahendra Patel, of course, exposed me to vernacular typography. We created entire font in Gujarati, and he helped me do that. SM Shah, of course, master in form. Ashok Chatterjee, he comes from a different perspective. He himself is not a designer, but he has so much knowledge of design and management that he was thinking, and so on and so forth. So, at NID, we had this great learning environments. And this is Vikas's father, Madhav Satale, who was, of course, a famous painter, and he used to draw amazing drawings he made. And so he was invited to train us in seeing things, more importantly, not necessarily drawing, but how to see and how to capture what you see in your own way. And that's where the storytelling begins, right? So you are sort of capturing something that is real, and then embedding a lot of things of your own as a creator or as a designer, and you're telling a story. So this is the first group, by the way. If you see myself not really quite involved, looking at other things, and that's how I've been. But these are my colleagues from the first year. And we had, field trips all over. You can see SM Shah, Varia, and all my colleagues in the first and second year going, and somebody is performing and everybody is enjoying that performance. So we were out in the environment. Nowadays they call design thinking to empathize. We did that then. We went to the rural areas, studied the environmental conditions that the people lived in, observed the objects that they're working with, figured out how they were communicating, either through words or drawings, and so that was an amazing experience. I wonder if it's still happening at some schools.
It is. But, at least in terms of Indian design pedagogy, it's still a huge part.
I'm glad to learn that. Yeah. In the schools that I had experience with, that wasn't really thinking. Going to the rural area was more fun rather than really the study. I mean, we were there in rural areas for almost a week, and we had to keep drawing and drawing. And Balram was, the mentor there, and he was an amazing teacher in terms of teaching us how to capture and how to see things that needs to be seen and analyzed, right? Critical thinking happened there. Is what you don't see is what you, critically find out. So this was thing. And then again, if you see this is a model that is made before an exhibition. This is again Vikas's project, and painstaking efforts that was put in to capture the idea, the concept, by building the model before the exhibition is built, to figure out lots of things. First of all, to convince people this is the way to go, that this is how it's going to look, and then figuring out the budgets for every parts of the exhibit. Good thing about working at an ID was the projects were usually massive. That involved product design, involved film, photography, furniture, name it, and everything was included in that exhibit, and everything was produced at NID. Everything was designed by NID faculty along with students. And that is what sort of made us. That is not the classroom projects. Of course, that had a lot to do with our understanding, but just experiencing things happening in front of us from scratch to finish. That was the amazing part. We were also doing other things. This is part of the fashion show that the textile students had put up, and I'm wearing some costumes with some of my colleagues.
You?
That's me right there. And so we had this varied experiences, right? It wasn't that just because I wanted to learn visual communication design, I couldn't be involved in other things like fashion and textiles and ceramics and you name it. So that is it. We were really considered to be the designers of the future or tomorrow, right? And this is an article that was published in Span, and my first year colleagues are here. Of course, the banker on the left and others on the left. By the way, the lady in the red is my wife, Krishna. And so finally we graduated in 1979. The diploma was given to us in 79. You can count the number of years it took, right? These days, I wonder if students or parents would be patient enough to wait for their convocation. I think these days, students start planning their convocation a year before they are supposed to graduate. So
That's true. And I have a feeling a lot of students are wondering in the audience, what took you 9 years?
well, it didn't take us 9 years. It took me 6 years because I did two things. I did visual communication design and I did films. So it was a 5.5-year program.
Okay.
So the earlier program was planned to be equivalent to a master's degree. That is why it was 5.5 years. And you can imagine the shock my parents had when they learned that this was a 5.5-year program. They're like, even medicine is not 5.5-year program, you know? Why is this one so long and so involved in terms of expenses? Though you won't believe the tuition we paid. And some of my colleagues who are here may correct me, but I paid 200 rupees for the entire year. And believe me or not, I may have consumed that 200 in the first day going into the photo lab, not knowing whether the paper was soft or hard, and came out with the paper in the daylight to figure it out.
Wow.
You can't just do that, right? You can't take a photo paper out before you expose it to the light to see whether it's soft or hard. So that is how naive we were, but that was the material that we were, able to work with. And stupid as we may sound, we learned our lessons through those errors, those mistakes. And these days, it's phenomenal. I know the fees structure is not as low as 200, but it was accessible to all of us. My parents didn't mind because the fees were low, but the time was 5.5 years. But I did two parts to my studies, and I graduated in 6 years. But it took 3 more years for NID to figure out the convocation. So that is the story. So after graduating, I established my own studio in Ahmedabad. It was called AV Art. There is a little story of that. It's a ridiculous name, right? AV Art. But my uncle had, though he didn't like me to go into art, but guess what? Irony, right? It's ironic that all his businesses were called, at the end, it ended with art. So he was in steel, right? He worked with steel, and his firm was called Steel Art. And then he worked also in tea, and he's like tea art, which makes no sense to me. And so I had to bow down and accept his thing because, it was still within the family, and you know how that works. So I said audiovisual art. So that was the the idea behind. But then I worked with lots of clients. One of the major one was the Hotel Karnavati, along with Ashoka. And these are some of the works that we did. Everything was done by hand. Everything was cut by hand. Films were cut for the productions of it, whether it was screen printing or it was offset. Everything was done by hand and cutting and pasting. So eventually, I closed down my studio in '84 because while I was working at the studio, I was involved in teaching at NID and working on different projects at NID. NID then offered me something that I couldn't have let go. There's a little story there too. They called me and said, well, if you join us, you can go anywhere in the world of your choice to learn teaching methodology. And I was doing fairly well at my studio, and I thought, this is great. I read about RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, and the new concept that professor there, Tom Okersay, was working on semiotics, the science of science. And that intrigued me. So I said, that's one thing. The other thing is that's the most expensive school in the world. So if I propose that, maybe they would say, nah, bhul jao, nahi ja sakte. So then I would be happy staying with my own studio. But guess what? 3 days later, I said, yeah, let's do it. So then I closed down my studio because we couldn't have our professional practice. Then the regulations of NID was that we couldn't have, because practice was part of teaching and learning at NID, which was phenomenal. And so I had to close down my studio and do practice as well as teach within the NID walls. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the left of me is my wife, Krishna.
There.
With glasses.
Yeah, here, right. What's interesting is that it's probably a footnote for a lot of educational institutions, because everybody, I think, these days struggles with finding good faculty. Offering to send faculty to learn anywhere in the world is a great incentive as any I've heard of. So if the educational institutions are listening, please take heed from this story. This is how we get good faculty.
True. So going forward, things didn't happen in terms of communication. We didn't have WhatsApp. We didn't have email. It was snail mail then, and the entire funding was through UNDP, United Nations Development Fund, along with NID. When I landed up at RISD, I was not only 5 days late, but I was part of the graduate program. So the communication from NID through UNDP, that I was there for 1 year, and I would be focusing on learning, teaching methodologies. I just landed up as a graduate student, and I was called in by Tom Okersay on the very first day. What do you think this is, right? How could you even imagine to be late by a week? There's no way. You've lost so much work, you'll have to catch up, and that's how I happened at, so, oops, I missed one. Many slides, actually, sorry.
We'll go back. But before we get started with your RISD journey, I had a question. I wanted to ask you that, given your experience with NID and your studio, I want to know you did talk about Charles and Reims a little bit, but what was the biggest idea or philosophy as you were starting to teach to influence who you became as an academician?
Very good question. I'm thinking back, right? So at that time, I just took the opportunities that came up in front of me. I never planned, in my mind doing this. I never planned to join NID full time. I never planned to even open my studio. I actually wanted to go to Mumbai and work for Ulka, where I did my internship. But then I didn't do well in Mumbai because humidity kills me. And so that was something that made me decide to open my own studio. So everything is an opportunity in my life that I embrace, not all of them, but most of them. Um, and teaching, in fact, I was the first class that was offered by Vikas to teach me is because one of the faculty members left in the middle of the semester, and Vikas called me. And again, I had a major presentation going for one of the hotels that I was working with. And he called me at 8 in the morning, said, I need to see you. And of course, in our culture, if your parents, your teachers, and your friends call you, you drop everything and you go. So I went, and he said, well, there is a class that begins at 10, and you need to start teaching. And I was perspiring like hell because I had a presentation at 11 with the clients. And I said, okay, you couldn't say no, no matter what. It was Vikas after all. And of course, he was my teacher. So, okay, it was a disaster because mentally I was not prepared. It was a letter form class, and I knew what I would do. But to teach is another thing, right? You can do it, but you may not be able to teach that. And that was something I had to learn. And so the first semester was a disaster. And again, I thought, okay, done. I would not have to do this again. And as soon as I finished, he called me into his office and he said, you're teaching another class. And so in those days, it was solid teaching. That means if you had typography for 5 weeks or 4 weeks, you would begin teach at 8, finish at 5, and it goes on for 5 weeks. Typography all 4 weeks from morning till evening. I think it still continues in some ways at NID, but that was me getting away from my family and studio for consolidated 4 weeks, which is a big deal, right? If you're gone for that many days. And we didn't have WhatsApp, again, remind you that we didn't have current technologies to communicate. Landlines were always busy, even if you had to. So that was the reason I got into teaching. And when I finished my first, Vikas called me and said, you're taking another class in typography now. And so, again, I couldn't say no. So that is how I got more and more involved in teaching, because the second time I taught, I had some time and I said, I cannot perform the same way as I did before. So I had some time to prepare myself, and that's what I did. And the second class went well, and then subsequently things started going my way, and so I'm delighted. I hope I answered your questions.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people who do teach, not all of them plan to teach, but realize that that's where they want to be. And it was certainly the same way for me. Interestingly, I was egged on by a friend of mine to try and teach, and I was like, no, I can never teach. And here I am, and still teaching. So
excellent. I'm sure in our audiences that I'm sure there are people who can relate to this. And I never wanted to be a teacher, but here I am, and you are still trying to learn to be better educators. And these are the mentors that you learn from, right? At NID, I showed you the mentors. I keep learning, not only to learn the skills, but also how to teach later when I was a professional. At RISD, Tom Okersay, Malcolm Greer, Christoph Lang, Sharon, these were all my mentors, and they are the ones also responsible. Later, I'll tell you a story, but let me tell you a little story of how and what we learned at RISD. Malcolm was a wonderful designer. His firm, he of course passed, but his firm still goes on. It's called Malcolm Greer Associates, and you can look it up. The readers can look him up. Wonderful work, endless work. One of his posters at Museum of Modern Art has a record of number of prints that they have sold of his design. But when we went to his class and we were working on letter forms and compositions of letter forms, we would spend hours and hours with black plaka and white plaka, making the forms absolutely perfect. And then every class we had to be on time and then put up our work. And the class would be about 20 to 25 students. The walls would be covered. These were all 20-inch by 20-inch boards. And we would put it up. He would come. And of course, the previous students would know what he has in his pocket. But being the first class, I didn't know that he had something in his pocket. So we'll put it up. He'll spend about 10 minutes looking at each work. And then he will take out a pair of scissors from his pocket. And he will pick up one of the students' work. And of course, we have spent hours and hours reforming the form, and he'll chop it up and then put it back again and say, now, doesn't that look much better? And
brutal.
Now I think I would be sued if I did that in class. And invariably, even the slight movement, about 2 millimeters or so, the form would look so much better. So here's, the forms. That's a slide, of course, of the studio. You can see what I had on my table, always cutting and pasting. So these were the forms that we put up on the wall. Again, I'm just showing you 8 because of the limitation in space and time, but these were all hand cut before we made the plaka boards. And so we had to make at least about 100 to 150 sketches of just one little form, which was P. So we had to pick the first letter of our last name in a font, and then typeface. And you're stuck with that. You have to make composition of that without losing the identity of the letter form.
Wow.
And so these were the few that I had. And the one on the left top is in his book called Inside Outside. And I suggest people buy that book because that's one of the wonderful, documentation of what you and Anuradha discussed yesterday about reflective practice. Mm-hmm. And so he has 2 parts in the book, which is his practice and also what he did in the school as a teacher. And so that's where the name comes in. Of course, he was a collector of all kinds of calibers, which is a symbolic, meaning that he gives is how do you measure your successes. And so that is how we learned at RISD. My first year finished with lots of excitement. One of the things that I did, though they didn't know that I wasn't going to be there for the second year, and therefore I took 18 credit hours of work, which was in my first semester, which was sort of suicide. 18 hours of studio work is like you never sleep, and I never did. I slept probably 2 hours a day in my first year, or even in second year too. But it was a phenomenal experience. And at the end of the first year, I got the opportunity to go to Brazago. It is a program, it's now no more. But then Yale and Basel School combined, they collaborated and was offering this summer program where we were taught by these great people. Armin Hoffman, of course, he also came to NID in the formative years where Vikas and SM and Pradeep Choksi all learned from him. And it was exciting for me to meet him because he had never come back to India or NID after his initial involvement, to see him. And then, of course, the world famous Wolfgang Weingart with his books and typography experiments. Philip Burton, who's now with Morningstar. Alvin Eisenman, who was the dean at the program at Yale for visual communication. Paul Rand. Nobody, I don't need to talk about Paul Rand. Richard Sapper, who was the industrial designer in Italy. Dorothea Hoffman, wife of Armin, who taught us drawing, and so on and so forth. So these were the great mentors just teaching us in 6 weeks. Each one of us taught for a week or half of the week, depending on what was happening. Those 6 weeks were one of the best weeks I've spent in summer. So then finally I returned back to NID in 87 after finishing up my RISD first year at Brizago. Started working immediately on an exhibit, My Land, My People. And these are the final productions. This is an installation of that in Moscow. So it was an exhibit that traveled to 3 different places, Tashkent, Almaty, and Moscow. It took us 2 years to design and manufacture everything, and then 1 year to pack everything. And I think phenomenal amount of cargo was shipped to Russia. But you can see, again, information design in 3-dimension comes into play. All the training I had from Vikas in terms of how to display objects that in fact is not just a decoration, but a critical points of information that is given out. Now, you should remember that this is the time when Gorbachev had just announced perestroika. So the idea and this was for Festival of India, it was a government project. The idea was to show the Russian audiences the benefits of being a democratic country. And so we covered everything. This was from the eyes of children. My land, of course, that says everything. How do we live? How do we work? What do we eat? What do we wear? Where do we go to school? Everything that happens in a child's life, as I'm just talking about it in my life as from childhood, all that was displayed, which was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
Again, great example of history wall with even 3-dimensional objects embedded. And this was, of course, this is a section where we talk about stories, our traditional stories from Vedas and religion and so on and so forth, and the interpretation from the perspective of children as to what they got out of these stories. Music. And so this was all packed carefully and shipped so that it would go from one place to another. We had learned stories that it was going to be difficult because everything in Russia was handled by military people. And so they were not as sensitive. So they would throw the crates out in nowhere. And so I remember being with my colleagues to Tashkent, and we landed up and we were looking for our crates. And they would keep telling us, it's fine, it's okay, it's safe. And they wouldn't deliver on time. And so the third day I said, I want to go to a place where these crates are. And reluctantly they took me, and it was a nightmare. The crates were thrown around in this 7 feet of ice, and it was pretty cold. It was January. And we then pushed them to get the crates to the exhibition hall within 6 hours. I don't know how we did it, but we did it. Again, this
quite
is
a phenomenal exhibition, actually. And I saw that it mentions that it was bilingual. So you had to create type and font and everything, all the communication in 2 languages.
2 languages. Yeah, this was a challenge. Of course, I still don't know Russian. I can, say and understand a few words and sentences, but not everything. So we had to hire a Russian expert to translate every text that went onto these panels into Russian language. And most of it was screen printed onto the panel itself. So you can imagine if we made one error, we had to rub it off and print it again.
Yeah.
So yes, that was fascinating, and I'm always fascinated with languages and letter forms in different languages. So it was a good exposure for me personally to understand what happens.
Um, uh, uh, I also want to ask you another thing here. I remember when we were discussing this, you mentioned that this exhibition was actually a way to impress on Russia that democracy is the way of the future. And in some
Mhm.
sense, here, the communication design or design, even vernacular design, almost became a political tool. Is that an accurate assessment of what the intent was behind the exhibit?
Well, if you see the first slide, right? So this is a place where we talk about food, and unfortunately, I don't have color slides of these.
Mm.
These were contact sheets that I've fished out day before yesterday, and these are small little parts from the contact sheets that I've blown up to be shown with. And so, as you see in the background, we have all these languages,
Mm.
right? And letter forms of each of these languages that we have in our country. So it's, and then if you see at the bottom, each form is shown exactly where it's spoken with a map of India and the sound of it in the Russian language next to it. So if you see on the right-hand side, bottom of the first panel, that's the form that is up, which is cropped,
Right.
but a full form is shown. And then where is it spoken? So this is in Assam and the sound of that. And that went on for all these panels. We wanted to divide the exhibit because of the sequence that people needed to follow to go through the exhibit. So we used these panels, and these were all in different colors. So in that way, the slide doesn't do much of the justice. But that is how we expose that a democracy can have your own regional culture, your regional language, and it can still work very well, because inherently there were issues, and still continues to be, that different cultures exist in Russia also. There are Muslims, there are Christians, all kinds of cultural communities are still there, and they still have conflict. I mean, we know what's going on, right, in Europe and
Yeah.
in neighboring countries of Russia. So it was, yes, you're absolutely right. It was politically a means to show what a democratic country can be.
Mm.
Um, and in terms of food also, they could be culturally varied food and still love each other's food and cuisine and enjoy the being together. So that was really the idea. Um,
It's amazing. I mean, it really
so
goes to show the power that all these design students who are listening in, the potential of what you're learning, actually. But please, sorry, I interrupted again. Please go
no,
ahead.
no, not at all, not at all. Absolutely fine. So going back to your earlier comment on how institutions need to sort of uh, give this incentive to faculty members to go abroad and learn and come back.
Mm.
So when they were sending me to RISD in my first year, um, uh, they had asked me to sign a contract for 3 years. And I said, please don't ask me to sign, because then I'm only bound legally for 3. But if I do not sign, I'm morally bound for the rest of my life. But that's not how things work, right? They have to have something written down. So I had signed the thing. In the background, my first year after my first semester, after taking 18 credits, I had my first C in the first semester. All the A's, but I had 1 C. And that became a challenge for me. So in the second semester, I took 15 credits, 1 less class, and topped it.
Wow.
So I was A plus or A and A plus in all my classes. So RISD internally had decided that they wanted me back, because now the story was clear to them what I was supposed to be there and what I was doing. So they were very impressed that though the mission was something else, I took up the challenge of being a graduate student in classes. And that's how I learned teaching methodologies, because I was observing all the mentors and how they were teaching. So I was fulfilling the mission and vision of what NID had for me to be at RISD, but at the same time, I was a student as well, which was phenomenal because I could understand being with the students all the time, the frustrations they would have when a teacher would say something or ask them to do something. And then working with the teachers themselves, because I was the TA for teaching assistant for quite a few of them.
Brilliant.
They, when I left for the first year before I went to Brazil, Tom Okerson said, would you come back after 3 years? And again, see how opportunities come in, right? And at that point, I wasn't sure. My family was in India. I had, the obligation to come back to NID. Mentally, I was saying, no, I need to serve the institution. So cutting the story short, 3 years went by very quickly because of my involvement with Mila and my people. Thank God the RISD had prepared me to sleep 2 or 3 hours, because doing that exhibit, we were hardly sleeping, including my colleagues, including the drivers of NID. They would pick us up, drop us back in the middle of the night, sleep for a couple of hours, get back to school again, or the institute again. 3 years went by very, very quickly. At the end of the third year, he had made a note, and I had just returned from Moscow, after sleepless nights. Tom calls me in the middle of the night, because it's morning at RISD, right? In the middle of night here. And he says, are you coming back? And quick things are flashing in my mind. What does that mean? Coming back as a student, that's the $40,000. I don't have that. So I said, I laughed, and Tom said, just let me know, would you be willing to consider? And I said, okay, I'll consider. So 15 days later, through snail mail, I get a letter from RISD that please come to teach for the winter session. So they have a very short 6-week winter session where they invite faculty from all over the world to come and teach. So Krishna and I went. She also got invited. She was teaching in textiles. I taught in visual communication design. And there is no discussion for those 6 weeks. So we would have meals with Tom. By that time, Tom's family and my family became very close, because Tom had also come to India while I was still a student at RISD. And so at the end of those 6 weeks, he said, I hope you saved all the money and not spend it, because you will need it. And I said, Tom, this is not enough. It's not going to be enough, and I don't have the rest of the money. So Tom said, okay, so you were serious of coming back. So he sort of trapped me in some ways, right? And I said, yeah, if the resources are there, I might think about it. Again, the cultural thing is you can't tell your teacher no, full thing, right? It's that problem, cultural problem. So I left things vague, and he said, okay. And so we returned. Again, 15 days later, snail mail, I was appointed as a faculty member.
Oh, fabulous. Congratulations.
For a year. So it was a year contract. And I was going to teach only one class. And the rest of the time was supposed to spend on my thesis work. So again, opportunities came in. My mind then went to the legal side and said, okay, legally, I'm supposed to be here 3 days. But anyways, we discussed, and they gave me a leave of absence for a year. And I went to RISD to finish my second year. So
So yeah, I'm just going to interrupt you here very quickly. So we have a bunch of questions that are coming in. So maybe we give ourselves another 10-15 minutes and then we pick up questions. Would that be okay with you? I know I'm kind of jumping
absolutely,
a bit.
absolutely.
So let's get back to your presentation. This is just a time reminder.
Okay. So returned to RISD, graduated in 1990. Then immediately, so when I graduated, uh, all my mentors started putting application forms on my table saying apply, apply, apply. And their whole thing was, you have taught at NID, which is your home. You can feel very comfortable there. You've taught at RISD, and after the graduate programs, of course, you're now feeling very comfortable. But you need to go out there in the world and apply, go through the application process, be there for at least 1 year or 2 year, and then you're ready for the rest of the world, because that's the territory you've never been to, and then you prove yourself that you can function. Again, the whole culture, right? I couldn't say no to them. So I applied to various universities. To my surprise, I was shortlisted for 3. And even RISD offered me a full-time thing.
Wow.
But I was miserable in Providence because of the winters there. I froze, my mind froze and everything. So it didn't work. So Florida State had offered me a job. Washington University also had offered me a job. But when I went for interviews, I was like, oh, these are different forms of, Florida was humid, so you can understand my Mumbai phobia because of the humidity. I didn't accept either of those two. And the last interview I had was at Arizona State University. So when I left for my interview from Providence, we had, I think, about 6 inches of snow on May 5th. Which was 2 days before my final thesis presentation. So I left with layers and layers. I feel very cold. You can see I'm still wearing a sweater while my son outside is in t-shirts and short. I left Providence with 6-inch flow. When I reached Arizona airport, it was 102 degrees.
Wow.
And I said, whoa, this is the place.
I guess Arizona was lucky that you had a weather condition.
And so I felt very comfortable in that environment. It was dry, hot, and I could see myself functioning full speed. And that's how I got hired at Arizona State University. It took me 4 years. I was hired an associate. Usually the tenure system, I don't think we have tenure system in our universities. That's the critical thing between the universities in the Western world and India, is you are never hired for permanent position, no matter what, right? So I was hired because of my experience of teaching at RISD and NIT as an associate. That meant that I had only 4 years to prove myself in 3 areas: teaching, research, and service.
Right.
And others who joined with me had 6 years because they were hired as assistant professors. And so I had to buckle up. Luckily, I played my cards well. I guess I did well, and I was hired full-time with tenure in 94. And then I worked for 26 years at NID. The slide that you see is student work, again, information design. And I am passionate about social issues and have my students address those. And this one is about the dark side of convenience of food that we eat. And this is happening now like a disease in India. We eat things from Pizza Hut and KFC, and it's the same deal, is how much chemicals we put into our bodies. So this is one of the students' project. This is another set of project, which is one of my favorite. I ask my students to look up Haiku, and then interpret that from three different perspectives. One is the iconic, which is meaning that the language is iconic here. It looks like what it is. Symbolic, which is the type itself. And the one on the right is the indexical. That means it's not what when you read the haiku, it sort of brings some ideas in your mind, because it's, when you read the type itself, it's free of any images. Therefore, 100% is based on your imagination, which is symbolic interpretation, right? The middle one, which is the iconic, which means what you imagine is actually what you are shown, or the person who's communicating is showing that. Therefore, your interpretation is narrow.
Right.
And the one on the right is again indexical. That means it is an index to something else that the interpreter wants, or the designer wants you to interpret. So there are three different ways, and this is the semiotic part that I learned at RISD, which I'm trying to teach students in a very simple way.
I also want to just say that for people who may not know what haiku is, it's a Japanese sort of, it's like the Twitter of poems in some sense. It's a micro poem that you have to finish in 6 words. And I think some of the rules says that the last word of the 2 lines must rhyme or something like that. I'm not sure, but
rhyming is not necessary.
Rhyming is not necessary, but it's like
syllables, right? You have fixed number of syllables.
Fixed number of syllables. That's right.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So this is that the type doesn't change, but the image in the background changes, and that makes the difference. Again, information design. This is a student work. So what I have the students to break the ice in my first class of the 3rd year is to ask each of their colleagues number of things, how many siblings there are, what their father is doing, profession, what the sisters, all kinds of related information just to get them acquainted. That is one part, but also to get all that information and display that information with, with meaning. So this is one of the displays. So all these students are number of students in the class, different questions that are then related through color and dots. So this is the detail. How many male, how many female, nickname, no nickname, sisters, brothers, iPad, anything that they wanted to know about somebody has displayed. As you go around the circle, each of the students, you will be able to see what they have with big dots, small dots. It's sort of a measurement, right?
I find it hilarious that it's called starving designers.
Starving designers. So because of how much money they make, right? So again, critical thinking here is like, okay, this is a whole display of information. What is it that you make out of it? So he figured out that most designers didn't make that much money. They had to spend more money, of course, they're students. And that's another big difference between Indian culture and the Western culture. They fund their own education, which is very critical. So I'm sure he is thinking about his budget every minute. And therefore he wanted to show that part that we are all starving.
It's interesting. We did a poll yesterday where we asked a question about what they would like to do, earn dollars, be recognized, or have a creative life. And there was nobody who said earn the money. So I'm
That's
guessing
right. I remember that.
Are we going to have a lot of starving designers on our hands?
No, as Anuradha was surprised and gladly surprised, happily surprised. I am too. If they can make it, that's wonderful. And of course, there is no harm in looking at being a design millionaire too. I mean, it's a choice that one makes. So this is one of the final student exhibit, which has a little story. When my colleague El Samt, who's a good friend of mine, and we had a design firm together for many years, we both believed that there had to be an incremental change in the way we evaluate our students at the end of the semester or at the end of the year. Initially, when we joined the institute, or when we joined the university, it was the same. So each student would be asked to put up their work. Each one would be called, so about 15 minutes, and they will tell them whatever and leave. So there was no sense of accomplishment or finale for the final year students. So we had decided to incrementally change the way reviews were conducted at ASU. And so this has gained a lot of momentum. Every year end, students exhibit their work in public space. They generate their own funds to do it, because state university don't have funds like this. Every year, it began with modest, about $1,000, $2,000 collected from cookie sales and card sales. And now they have this wonderful poster show, which when they go for internships, they collect posters and then they sell them as an auction. And of course, it's an event for the city of Phoenix, where all designers, they just bid against each other to get the posters. And that's how they collect almost close to $10,000 to $12,000 to do their senior show. Of course, after I retired from ASU in 2015, I came to RISD, was there for 3 years, and then returned back to ASU. And I'm now currently involved in developing the online Bachelor's of Science in Design, Graphic Design. This will be a full 4-year program offered completely online to students all over the world. So that's what I'm doing currently. So present, I'm delighted to be here. That's my present. I believe that every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every month is what informs our present. The avenues are not determined. It's always in terms of opportunities that we have in front of us. We have a choice. We can embrace it, not embrace it. But unique journeys for each of one of us, all the audiences and all the designers in the world, they're all unique. One of the things I tell my students when I teach a class is, look out of the window. Can you see the tree? And of course, like, what stupid question you're asking? Yes, we can see the tree. And can you see the leaves? And they say, yes, we can see the leaves. The third question is, are all the leaves the same? And that's when they start thinking, and obviously the answer is no. And so that relates to their work that they do. So when I ask them that I need variations, multiple variations for what you're proposing as a design solution, there has to be more than 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. And so they get the point that I'm expecting a lot more work out of them. These days, students make about 3 or 4, and they settle for one of them, which may not necessarily the one.
I think a few years are burning as you say that in the audience.
I'm sure. Sure. And so, future, I don't know. I think from cutting and pasting to what we are just now doing is a big leap in humanity. I think I remember I was paying $3 per minute to speak to my family every weekend. I had a budget of $10, and I could only speak for 3 minutes. And now look at us. We are speaking to so many all at the same time, be able to see each other. And the technology has made this possible without paying a single cent.
That's true. That's true. It's amazing. I mean, I'm sure in your extensive academic career, you've seen technology shift over the years, both slowly and rapidly. And what do you feel with respect to design education? How do you see the shift happening in terms of the kind of students and the kind of responses that they have to learning communication design with or without technology? I know it's a big question, but I'm very curious to understand that.
I think students have a choice, right? They either embrace technology or they don't. And that's a choice they would make, like anything else that we have a choice to make. Um, a lot of my students, both at ASU and even in India, have decided, no, I'm not going the technology way. I would still like to, whether he's from RISD, she went and did her studies in printing in UCL, and she's still involved in printing and cutting films and doing everything the traditional way. And she's now a book designer with traditional means and ways of designing a book. So that's an example. A lot of students here in ASU get completely involved in their final thesis project, the capstone project, where they pick up the social issue and decide to go find a nonprofit organization and work for them. And so it's hardly, it's good to hear that they can give away that whole idea of design millionaire and spend their lives to their heart, because that's passion, right? So I think passion is critical for all students, whatever passion they have. If they have passion to be a millionaire, go for it. If they have a passion to not work with technology, that's their choice. But I think technology is, we've just seen a scratch of where it's going to go in the future.
Using that cue, I'm going to also bring up poll 2. Poll 3, actually, Swapna, if you don't mind, just to gauge where the audience's minds are in terms of where they see themselves as a person on this planet. Swapna, can we have poll 3, please? And while that poll comes, we'll also open the questions. So what would make you the happiest person on earth? And of course, this is from a design mind, to become a design millionaire. And since all of this is anonymous, don't feel shy about claiming it. If you really feel like you want to become a millionaire, please do. We need some design millionaires to keep us all aspirational. Famous designer, do you want to be well recognized, for your work, for your skill? Do you want to be a sustainable designer? Do you want to be an empathetic designer? Or do you don't care and you just want to be a good human being? So here are your options. Please take your time. In the meanwhile, we will open up the Q&A, Mookesh. There's a question from a Muhammad Nihal, and he's asking, dear sir, design is an element that cannot be taught and is something that must come from within. As an educator, how would you advise teachers and faculties to help students develop the necessary skills to form their own design, and how to inspire them to push further?
Very good question. I'm trying to see the question on the chat.
It's in the Q&A. It's in the Q&A box. So you'll see a Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen, and
right.
That's where the questions are.
Okay, just if you don't mind, just repeat the question.
Design is an element that cannot be taught and is something that must come from within. As an educator, how would you advise teachers and faculty to help students develop the skills to form their own design and inspire them to push them?
Yeah, very good question. I think design is an element that cannot be taught is a great piece of thinking. I think we are all designers. Even the person on the street who has never gone through any training of design are fabulous innovators. Two examples I can give you. One is this wonderful young lady in, I think in the South, developed a washing machine using a cycle. There was another gentleman who's an engineer. He's in the business of supari. So he has farms of supari that grows, and during the pandemic, all the workers ran away, but he still had to harvest the suparis. And he didn't have the means to do it. I mean, if you could go up and down the tree, maybe you would go through 4 or 5, and he had thousands of these trees. So he developed a scooter that goes up and down the tree in like 4 minutes or less to collect all the suparis. And within a day, he would finish, quite a bit of trees to harvest his suparis. Now, these are innovative ideas done by people who are not designers or trained as designers. So you are absolutely right. Design element exists in all of us. I'm sure all of us has redesigned the interiors of our bedroom or drawing room or other things in our house 100 times, because as the need arises, you change the situation, right? So you can't teach design elements, but I think you can teach the process of design, right? So design is a process, and it can go various different ways, right? So it's like Anuradha had given an example yesterday that a tree has just one way of going, but another way, and she used a term, and I forget that term. Right. And so that you can go various way. And banyan tree in our own culture grows that way.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So we can be banyan trees and not just a simple tree, where we can look at different options as what the needs be. That's another thing that I'm particularly interested in, is how does designers look at their work area? Where are they more focused on the needs, which is what NID initially was established for, and including me, I'm the culprit as well. We deviated from that perspective as design as need-based rather than want-based. Mm-hmm. Now, how many cell phones do we need? I mean, how much more are we going to do with that, right? But if we look at these examples that come from the street, where these are people are figuring out ways and means to do things differently, that benefits the larger population, is for me the key. Now, how do we teach this? We teach them by exposing and let them be in terms of what they want to do. I think what happens most times in classroom is we influence the thinking in certain formulatic, formula-based working. Like if you do step 1, then you can go to step 2. We talked about that yesterday. Then you have to go to, I think that needs to be looked at very critical. Is, can a student start anywhere and then go back and forth? And design is a cyclic process. It's not a linear process. You start somewhere, and then you realize something, you understand something, you empathize something, you make a prototype, and you feel it doesn't work. Then you go back to the first point till you reach to the last point where, again, it is an intermediate solution. It's not a final solution at all. No design is a final solution. It is a solution for time, right? And for culture. Things that we may design for, people within the range of 25 to 40 years in India may not work for the same age group anywhere else in the world, because the culture is different, the beliefs are different, the value sets are different. So I think that is what we need to let our students understand, that nothing is final, that it's just a point in the entire process that keeps going forward.
I hope that gives you your sort of answer. There's the next one. I think we were talking about context and we were talking about technology. I think the next one is really relevant. Development of technology, internet, and social media has definitely caused enormous change in communication design in context to scale, quality, style, etc. Do you think it is good? It is for the good? And if so, what is the best thing about it?
Very good question. Yes, everything is speed up. We have softwares that does this, immense number of alternatives and variations of an idea by a click of a button. So my kids whom I expect to make hundreds of variations, they can use that software and bring it to next class next day and say, here, you needed thousands, I have thousands generated by a software. But the key is the technology is not going to be able to figure out which one of those alternatives work the best for the people that we work with, right? Design is all about serving people. And even people is not the right word. I think serving beings, where we include other living beings that are so critical for our sustenance and for our existence as we go forward. One of my worries is that we will get so involved with technology that we will increasingly forget about other beings that we need to be with, right? So they may be neglected. I think good thing about what I observe with young minds is they are more and more concerned about other beings. They're more and more concerned about climate change. They're more and more concerned about sustainability. And I'm so happy to see that. But, AI is going to do only so much. It's all about human, our living beings, and designers will have to make that decision. I don't think AI will be able to make that decision because it's all about you and me living a better life, healthy life.
That's a great segue to which was going to be my last question to you, but I think I can bring it up here. What do you feel is going to be the role of designers in the future, given that the way technology is going? I mean, I know for a fact that there are now softwares that can make logos for you. You technically don't need a designer to sit and design a logo anymore. So what do you see as the role of designer, given the immersive technology that we're going to be surrounded with very, very soon?
Yeah, so I think, going back to my previous point about need and want, need versus want. AI can figure out all the wants, what makes more business sense, what is going to sell, what's not going to sell. So the bottom line is how I'm going to make money, right? And AI is going to be designed to do just that. But the other flip side of the coin is who needs design and why, right? So the need part to me is critical, and I hope that the designers can leave all the other work that they have done so far tediously and painstakingly for the AI to figure that out, and focus making appropriate decisions based on all that AI work for the right context, for the right people, in the most sensible way.
I think that's a great cue for us to see our poll, because we'll know in a minute, Mookesh, whether what your ambition and vision is for the future of design is going to come true or not. Let's see. Can we have the answers to the poll, please, Swapna? Ooh, there are design millionaires for sure. Great. I'm so happy to see that. Famous designer, 26%.
Yes, very good.
Closely, yeah, followed by a sustainable designer, that's 28%.
But look at the millionaire. Only 8%. Only 8%.
Gosh, we need to figure out how designers make more money. I think that's the next task for all
No, this is a great. I'm so happy to see that 28% of audience is they don't care. They just want to be better human beings, and also at the same time, 28% for sustainable designer, which is so. I'm so delighted to see this. And one anecdote I will share, and this will be my last, is when we were in graduate school, Tom Okersay would come into class and studio. We are all working our heads into our work. We have all our heads into our work and not thinking about anything else. And in the middle of that, he would say, stop your work. Let's come grab some tea. And, he was fond of tea just like me. And we would gather around the table and he would give us his sticky paper and say, write down exactly what you have said here. Instead of happiest person, you would say, what kind of designer would you like to be, right? And so we would all write, it's like famous designer, millionaire designer, or designer of such and such thing, or US, UIs, whatever. But it was all about our dreams to be something in the profession. And he would also write down, because it was always a process that we would all do things together. He also made projects while we were doing our projects. He would make his projects and share it at the end of the class. And then we all went around the table, and we all had this, cliche kind of answers on a sticky paper. And when he turned he went last always. And he says, I want to be a better human being. So I'm glad to see 28% without going to RISD learn this. And I learned that, and that opened my mind as to, yeah, that makes sense. So yes,
Absolutely.
being a better human being, I think, is the key.
Absolutely. I always tell that I often say this, that design offers wisdom in a certain sense, the way you want to live your life. And I think to become a better human being, if design can lead you to that, that's amazing. You just mentioned that you would sit with coffee with Tom Oker, and with the pandemic, many students are locked up at home. And there's a student asking, what advice would you share to your young college student who are sitting indoors due to pandemic?
See this as an opportunity. You can be in your, as we're doing now, right? You can be in your comfort of the home and connect with amazing number of people that you may want to listen to or interact with, which was very difficult to, or even culturally, we were not that forward going to send out an email or say, but now it's become part of our culture, at least since last year and a half. Anybody can write and connect with you on WhatsApp and quickly give you an answer. So for me, it's an opportunity. It is not something that holds you back. Yes, we are all social animals, and we like to be together, and we learn a lot while being together across the table, talking spontaneously about a lot of things. But I see this as an opportunity to connect with the rest of the world and learn from the rest of the world. I mean, there's so many courses now offered, and so many students still take those courses, short courses online, and gather knowledge. I think the only problem would be, how do we turn that knowledge into wisdom, which can only happen when we are together.
Mookesh, this has been such a phenomenal sort of lesson in how to actually find your way through life, really. And I think I have time for maybe one last question, and I'm going to combine it with the last question I wanted to have because it's very similar. Sangeeta asks, you've gone through a wonderful life experience, and what kind of suggestions would you like to give to the new generation of designers? So I want to combine this with the question I wanted to ask you, is that if you were a student today, what would you do differently? So I think that you can answer both, I guess.
So very quickly, I'm not too surprised with your question because you asked Anuradha the same question. And my answer is similar to Anuradha. I wouldn't change a thing in my life. It's been a great experience throughout my life. I've had many mentors and great friends, and I see someone here who is my classmate, Dipankar Bhattacharya. Unfortunately, because I'm talking, I can't multitask, and my apologies to him. I can't answer his question, or I did not answer his question. But many, Hemant Sudhar, for example, he was my student. He's here. So it is unique that the life that we have, I wouldn't change anything. And what was the second part of your question?
What advice would you give to new generation of designers?
Yeah, be yourself. Do not be afraid of making mistakes, because that's where you learn the most. If I feel very sad when a student comes up with a good solution and then feels very happy, And I always wonder if the student had gone the other way and had made some errors, would the student learn more? Because then you're critically looking at what other options could be there. And so though the solution might be good, I think making errors make you realize more possibilities. And I think that's where the learning is. Second thing I would say is take risks. You're not going to lose anything. And, go out there, do stuff, make stuff, interact with people, look at all the painted trucks on the street, which is unique to our area. Talk to people, understand them, what kind of life they live and where do they have challenges, and you may be able to address those challenges as designers. So being here in Charlotte, I go out every day for an hour because there's a park where all oldies like me go and talk to each other. So we go there and, I hear a lot of issues. I have this pain, that pain. I can't walk. I need a stick, which does so and so things. And I pass on those issues to my students. It's like, I have a community here, right? And they have these issues. And can you do something about it? And all my online second year students are looking at those kinds of issues in their own community because they're everywhere, right? So I think students should do something like that, if not 24/7, but maybe 2/7 or 3/7.
Fantastic. This has been fabulous, and I think I found the perfect quip, Mookesh, to end this with, and it'll resonate with what you just said. And it's a little tongue in cheek, so bear with me. Dare to be different, be bold or italic, but never regular.
Absolutely perfect. Very good. Well, you can be regular if you want to, if it's your choice, but being bold and being italic is very critical. I think it will take you more places than you ever imagined. So I think you're absolutely right.
Thank you so much, Mookesh.
My
You are
pleasure. My pleasure.
inspirational. I'm sure the audiences have had a lot of fun listening to you. And what amazing images. I mean, because I never went to NID, I think this is probably the first time I've actually glimpsed into all the things that went down in the early days. So that was very, very enlightening. And, as always, you're a teacher, and I've learned so much just in this session. Thank you so very much, Mookesh.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And a big thank you to all our audiences. Thank you for staying back. And I know that we've kind of run over by about 15 minutes or so, but thank you for sticking with us. And I know I couldn't take up all the questions, but you are who you are, and we'll get back to you if we can. And very quickly, a reminder, tomorrow we have Professor Nidip Mehta. He was in the audience. I don't know if he's still there. He's going to be talking with us tomorrow, and I'm very curious about this session because he's my former boss. So let's see what answers I can get out of him now that I've been dying to ask him. So that'll be fun too. So thank you very much for staying with us for the second round of Point of View. It has been great, Mookesh. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wish you and everyone in the audience the very best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.